Welcome to Bottled Paradise, a podcast series for hardcore papyrus by me, Corey Mark Fisher. Today we talk to Sue Higginson, a high-profile environmental lawyer who has proven her abilities in the Supreme Court when she represented a community in the Hunter Valley and led them to victory against the global mining giant Rio Tinto in the heroic Battle of the Bulga. In this episode, we talk about Sue's fight against Rio Tinto, the complicated legalities of water mining in the northern rivers, and tips and tricks on how you can become politically activated and play a part in steering Australia towards a more prosperous and brighter future. So Sue Higginson, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Very well, thank you.
I'd like to start off by beginning in letting people know that I met you at the Yukai Hall, which was to talk about the local issues of water mining at the time. And you stood up and you talked about how you're an environmental lawyer and you're also running for the state seat of the Greens Party in 2019. Is that correct?
And that's for the state seat of Lismore, which is for the Greens, which is a large seat, covers all the way up to the Queensland border, to Murwillumbah, and captures Lismore, takes in Kyogle, again all the way up to the Queensland border and all the way out to the northern tablelands and Tenterfield. Wow. So it's a really large and beautiful electorate.
It is. It's very beautiful. And I would say it's probably one of the most environmentally concerned or famous for its environmental action as well, and its support for the Greens. That's my personal opinion anyway. Can we get into a little bit of background with you in environmental law? Because I believe that you took on Rio Tinto at one time.
I did. I was very lucky. About 13 years ago, I joined what's known as the Environmental Defenders Office. So it's a community legal centre that operates across all of New South Wales and beyond and specialises in public interest environmental law. That organisation now is, I think, about coming on to 35 years of age, and it's a remarkable institution and very unique. And ultimately what it does is acts for community groups and individuals that are concerned about the environment, whether it's a decision that's going to impact the environment or it's the way the environment is being managed. And they come to us and we use our expertise in law to see how we can make the law operate to protect the environment. As I say, I was really lucky to join the EDO. I went into it thinking that the law is a great thing. It's a fabulous tool, a very powerful tool, and it can protect the environment. But after sort of nearly 15 years of practicing in that field of law, I left EDO in November last year. So I've been nearly 12 months out of that direct practice. And what I have learned and what I did realise is that while there are some fantastic avenues to succeed, I have realised, and professionally I've realised, that most of our environmental laws are not, in fact, fit for purpose. They're not designed or they don't achieve the primary objective of protecting the environment. And I can talk about that a little bit later, but before I get into perhaps the more critique of the environmental laws, what I certainly did experience was some fantastic successes. So I was part of the team at EDO that took on Rio Tinto. This was an enormous mine project back in 2010.
Coal mining?
Coal mine, open-cut coal mine in the Hunter Valley. So we know that the Hunter Valley is overwhelmingly under siege, I say, by open-cut coal mines.
It's also a huge agricultural area as well.
Yeah, and it's the heartland of the equine industry, the horse breeding studs, and the wine region, of course. So that viticulture and growing some of the world's most famous wines, Hunter Valley Australian wines. After working around the Hunter Valley for many years, coming across communities that were being so significantly impacted by neighbouring coal mines. Basically, we can certainly look, and now we can look back at the decisions we've made to allow coal mines so close to communities and so close to homes and schools that we're learning more and more that those decisions were not sensible decisions, and we really have had negative impacts on people living in those communities. We talk about them now really as coal communities. They're communities that are so impacted by coal. I'm talking about things I've seen with my own eyes, shocking, where you go to somebody's home and the person may even work in the coal mine, or the father or the mother, and you go into their home and there's 3 children there, and the mother's wiping the kitchen bench and the dust on the bench is black. And it's coal dust, or the dust on the windowsill is black. I had one client that she, an elderly lady in her 80s, and we were at her house, and her solar panels on her roof were black, so black, that they weren't properly functioning. And she said, "Oh yes, I have to get somebody to come and clean them, regularly, every couple of months." But what I was actually looking at was her roof was also the catchment for her water that she was drinking. And so we're talking about, these particulate matters, coal dust, at concentrations of, what we call parts per million, 2.10 and 2.5s. And these are things that, while we're approving these projects, we assess them and we look at what's the impact's going to be. But ultimately, we approve these projects. We are New South Wales government, and in Queensland, the Queensland government, basically through our laws, it says, yeah, that's okay. That development can happen. You'll do everything you can to manage that particulate matter, that dust, that coal dust. But, at the end of the day, you're allowed to emit a certain amount of dust. And really, I think we can look back now and be sure that we have got some of the protections wrong. We got the buffers wrong in terms of the distances where these open-cut coal mines were allowed to be from people's homes. Basically what happens is the coal mine will come along, it will see a large area of land, it will buy most of the land, and then it will get its approval to cut its open-cut coal mine. And what the government does is says to people that are living very close by, "Oh, look, you're going to be impacted significantly above what we call the safe thresholds, therefore we'll give you acquisition rights." And that means if you want to sell your property, the mining company has to buy it from you. So it's a really interesting system that the government can come along, allow an enormous development next door to you, and say that you are going to be significantly impacted above safe health guidelines. And then they say, well, the mining company is allowed to go ahead, but really you can ask to be bought out, and the mining company has to buy you at market value. Now, in my journeys, I met a lot of people that found that the most harrowing, horrific life experience they'd ever had. Their home, their farm, they'd spent their whole life there. It may have been passed down from, 3 generations. You may be running a perfectly viable dairy farm, but this coal company is approved to go ahead, and basically your only option is to sell your land to them. So that's been happening now across New South Wales for a long time. So when Rio Tinto, as it was then the Warkworth coal mine, so this was a fairly large coal mine already, and what happened was near the village of Bulga, this beautiful, beautiful historic little town in the Hunter Valley. In fact, historically it was very significant. It was one of the first towns that the sort of white people pioneered and opened up, as we could say it, when we open up a valley for white man's agriculture, etc., and colonising. That was Bulga was the entrance to that part of the Hunter Valley, and it's a really, really beautiful town with lots of significance and historic value. And so the Warkworth coal mine developed, the Warkworth-Thorley coal mine developed and was approved back in 2002. And the coal company then said, okay, well, we're going to develop this much of the coal reserve, and in order to do that, we're going to have to cut down this endangered ecological woodland, and we know it's very valuable, but that's okay. We're going to protect all this woodland over here, and we'll get rid of this, and we'll start digging the big hole and mining the coal out. And in 2002, to allow that mine, the government said, okay, well, as long as you're going to protect all that Warkworth Sands woodland, this woodland, I'll tell you about it in a minute, is a really unique ancient woodland that exists nowhere else in Australia, just in this little part of the Hunter Valley. It comes down to the science, the evolution of the way the winds blew and the sands and this incredible, unique landscape that has happened purely out of the coincidence and the phenomena of the earth and the way it works. When we were in court talking about it, the way the scientist was describing it was just, it sent shivers down your spine to understand the ecological significance of this incredible, unique woodland that exists nowhere else in Australia, in the world. Anyway, so back in 2002, the government said, yes, you can cut down all that woodland, dig your big hole, take all your coal out, but you've got to protect this area over here, so that we can guarantee we don't make the woodland extinct. So in 2010, the company realised that the export coal market was booming. The price of coal hit the roof. It was incredible. There was so much potential to make a lot of company money fast. And it was a boom. It was an absolute boom. Newcastle Port had never been busier.
2010?
In the period leading up to 2010, right. Yeah. So at this point, Rio Tinto, who had taken over the Warkworth mine, went, whoa, we're going to have a stake of this. Come on, let's dig a bigger hole, dig it faster, and get that coal out to all those countries that, we're burning coal rapidly in. And so they went back to the government, and notwithstanding the ministerial signed agreement between the company and the minister that part of the Warkworth Sands woodland would be protected, this project came along, and to expand this mine, they were going to have to take out another several tens of however many hectares of Warkworth Sands woodland there was, the last bit that they'd protected. And in doing so, they were going to blast out the last ridge between the little village of Bulga and the coal mine. So for all of these years, since 2002 to 2010, the mine had been operating, and the life of the mine was predicted to end in 2012. But the mine said, well, no, we now are going to put in an application to dig the hole twice as big, and the life of the mine, and I've probably forgotten the exact date, I think it was till about 2025, 2022, the mine would continue on for, as opposed to stopping in 2012. And so the community, and particularly the client group that came to us, the Bulga Milbradale Progress Association, was made up really of a bunch of sort of older farmers, older residents who had lived in the village of Bulga, many of them for all their lives. They were part of the Little Rural Fire Brigade, they were part of the community hall or the shop, or, this fantastic, beautiful, vibrant, alive rural community. When they heard what the plan was, they thought, oh, well, that will never happen. We've been promised that the ridge will protect us from the mine. We know the mine is going to end in 2012. We know that. And we know they can't take the last of the woodland because the minister signed the agreement saying they couldn't. And so then...
But then they could.
And then what happened was the New South Wales government approved the new extension, and it was a really large extension. And that's when the community came to our organisation and said, this just can't be legal. Tell us the law. Explain that this can't happen. And so we had a really good look at the approval for the extension, the assessment process that had been undertaken. Because, coal mines take a few years to be assessed and then approved. They're big projects, lots of consultants involved. And ultimately the way it happens is the mine engages a consulting firm. The consulting firm gets paid by the mining company, and they do the water study, the air study, the noise study, the ecological study, the engineering study, and then ultimately the consulting company gives the big EIS document to the company, and the company and it says, yes, it can go ahead. Yes, we can manage all of these impacts. We can mitigate all of these impacts over time.
So it's not necessarily an unbiased appraisal, considering they're being paid by who are they being policed by?
Well, we say that, in my opinion, it's a completely biased appraisal. They're being paid directly by the mining company, and the mining company ultimately gets to send back draft versions, which I know has happened. We know that happens. The company will say, can you do these things? And the mining company might come back and say, no, that's too expensive. We won't be able to implement those mitigation measures. So they say, what about these ones? And the mining company goes, well, I suppose we could do some of those. Okay, well, let's try and find a middle ground of what we can do. And that's how they work. There's no secret. That's how they work. And then those documents have to get assessed by the New South Wales Government's Department of Planning. And, there's some expertise in there. But we're going back to this period in 2010. We were in the days where I have no doubt, while there was certainly assessment going on from the government agency, there was a clear modus operandi of approve these mines. The coal boom export boom is enormous. The royalties we're getting in are big, and there were very close relationships between mining executives and politicians in power in New South Wales. There's no question about that. We saw it through what happened with Eddie Obeid and Ian MacDonald and ICAC. We saw what a racket was going on in terms of certain mining leases and mining industries. The mining, it was king. The price of coal was king, and everybody was trying to get their little stake in it. Sadly, at the expense of beautiful living communities with real people in them and our environment and some of the most unique, rare, incredible places of our environment. So, the government approved it. The community group came to us. We looked at it and we said, right, well, let's take it to court. Let's challenge it. This is just not right. We were so lucky because we were able to, this is where environmental law gets a bit complex, and I'll just explain as briefly as I can. The community in challenging large projects, there's two types of challenges. One is called a merits appeal. That's an appeal where the community has a right to go to court and say to the court, this was a bad decision and the evidence is not the best evidence that was used to make the decision, and look at all our evidence. This is the evidence we say the decision should be made on. So this is where the community gets a little bit of environmental justice, and a bit of equity comes into the playing field, because no longer is the decision being made really only with the mining company's environmental experts and consultants, with the community having a little bit of a say. This is where the community group or the challenger or the individual gets to go to court, put their own independent experts on the witness stand, and most importantly, this is where the community, through their lawyers, get to challenge the mining company's consultants in a court of law, swearing on evidence. And that is what we have found, or what we found in this Rio Tinto case, to be absolutely groundbreaking in terms of the way mining approvals were assessed in New South Wales. For example, what we managed to do, so this was the Bulga-Milbrodale Progress Association versus Warkworth Mining, which was ultimately Rio Tinto, was the parent company of Warkworth Mining. It was incredible. We were able, so this, as part of the approval, the government had agreed with the company that this mine was going to create thousands of jobs, an enormous amount of money flowing back into the local and regional economy. It was going to it was not going to damage the Warkworth Sands woodland so much, because it's okay. The mining consultant said it's okay. We can grow the Warkworth Sands woodland again somewhere else. We can plant it somewhere else and it will be fine. And it also said the noise impacts won't be great on the community. It'll be fine because here's all our modelling. So we ran a court case that went for sort of 15 days, and we put our experts on the stand. We put environmental economists on the stand. It was the first time ever in New South Wales that environmental economists had actually been in the Land and Environment Court in New South Wales. And to cut a very long story short, we were ultimately able to show that what the consultants had said would be the economic benefits of this mine would not at all be real or realised in the time as they said. Their modelling was flawed. The input-output method they use with the cost-benefit analysis, our experts and through our experts and our barristers, we were able to tear that to pieces. And ultimately all these new jobs that apparently were going to be created simply weren't. And in fact, the environmental costs of taking the Warkworth Sands woodland out of the ecosystem, we were able to highlight that too. So we got our ecological experts on the witness stand, and it seems to be the way with environmental litigation. Some of the best experts in the world tend to be the independent experts. They're either research scientists buried in a university somewhere with their head in the book. They're not ordinarily the people running around trying to make inordinate amounts of money servicing mining companies. So our ecological expert, who was the expert on the Warkworth Sands woodland, most renowned expert in the country, was willing to work for the community, pretty much for nothing as well. That's how it works, sadly. And weeks and weeks and weeks of work, evidence in court, and basically showed how you actually can't replicate a complex woodland like the Warkworth Sands woodland that has taken millions of years to evolve on that particular site. You can't just go out and plant it. In fact, he had shown that, all sorts of efforts that he had made in the field to try and do this had failed and failed and failed. And so then we were also able to show how Warkworth's noise modelling was completely flawed. They'd used all the wrong starting-based indicators, and their modelling was suggesting the noise wouldn't be anywhere near as harsh as it in fact would. So, after weeks and weeks of court case, and of course the judge going to the site, hearing from the members of the community, and the community talking about their experiences and what it would mean to them, and the horror, of course, that the minister's agreement all of a sudden meant nothing, as in the ones who say that they would protect that woodland that they were now going to get rid of. We got a judgment, and basically the court found, in one of the longest, most fabulous, comprehensive judgments in New South Wales, in my opinion, that the significant economic benefits, and he found that, yes, of course there would be enormous benefits from pulling back millions of tonnes of coal out of the ground every year and shipping it off, but the economic benefits in no way were able to outweigh the negative impacts that mine would have on the environment, particularly the Warkworth Sands woodland and the community. So it was the first time in history that a court had overturned a mining approval granted by a government. It's incredible what happened next. It's actually shocking. And we didn't actually know, other than the party, of course, which was wonderful, and everybody celebrated, and the community actually had an enormous belief in the system of environmental justice. What we didn't know is, while everybody was celebrating and it was on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, and we were all feeling, some sense of, hey, it's okay, justice is out there, you've got to work hard for it, and gee, it comes at a cost, but you can access it, it's there. What we did know is that, and I've forgotten his full name, it's Harry Slater somebody, or Slattery. Anyway, he was the executive of Rio Tinto at the time, responsible for energy and mining. He apparently, and we know this now from Freedom of Information applications years later, or a couple of years later, he flew over from London, and 2 days after the court decision was sitting in the New South Wales Premier's office saying, you've got to fix this. This is ridiculous. How can a community, and who the hell were these lawyers? How could they outsmart you, the government, and us? This is sovereign risk. You have to do something about it.
Sovereign risk?
Sovereign risk is this very strange notion. Sovereign risk is a serious and realistic notion, but it's been perversed in the sense of the coal industry. But sovereign risk is that, basically, to put it really short, is that overseas investment won't come to this country because the business isn't secure enough. It's too risky. So this idea that your environmental approval process can trump out an economic imperative of a corporation operating from overseas, basically the word in the street in the London, New York, Munich, wherever, Paris executive offices will be, oh, don't do business in Australia, they're too environmental, or it's not secure enough, you won't get your way. That's ultimately the way they're interpreting sovereign risk or naming sovereign risk.
So the perspective they're coming from in using that terminology is how Australia will perform and be looked at on the world stage.
Absolutely.
In terms of the economy.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very. And in my mind, quite perverse to suggest that communities have to suffer and the environment has to be so denigrated to the point, or really, I mean, the case was actually talking about the extinction of that woodland. Yeah. There's no greater harm to the ecosystem than, man-made extinction. There's nothing higher on the scale. I mean, if we're going to do it, sure, we choose to do it, then, we do it. But if we're just kind of incidentally doing it without a full body of decision and recognition, then it's the highest level of harm. There's no chance for error. Once something is extinct, it's gone. It's wiped off the face of the earth. The fact that the economic imperative of a coal mining company that's already generating millions of dollars of profit from an existing coal mine, and all it wants to do is expand and make more, is a sovereign risk if the court, through its own justice system, providing access to communities and community lawyers that can show in their own framework of rules and laws that this mine is not a good idea to go ahead. And then a mining... Anyway, so then what happened was the mining company ran an appeal. It was the largest appeal I've ever had to fight. We were in the Court of Appeal of New South Wales, which is the highest court in New South Wales. We had the Chief Justice of New South Wales on the bench, and the President of the Court of Appeal, and another expert judge. And the bench that you sit at, goes on forever. And I used to look at the bench, and there would be, the government's lawyers, Rio Tinto's lawyers, their barristers in front of them, and then there was me at the other end. There was me with the beautiful community group sitting behind. And
were you nervous?
No, never nervous. Never ever nervous.
Very cool.
No, never nervous. I mean, maybe a bit of the secret to all those things is you have to work really hard. The secret to not being nervous is you just have to prepare. You've got to be ready for every single sideways shot at you, and you've got to be over-prepared. So that's where your 19, 20-hour days come from, being a community lawyer for particularly the environment. Because, I don't know. I mean, the environment is just that thing that comes out second best every time, particularly to money and vested interest. So this enormous appeal. And obviously I had two barristers that were, the most beautiful human beings that worked around the clock to make this happen with us. They believed in their community, they believed in the law, and so Rio Tinto ran this massive appeal. Never seen appeal books so large. Even the judges commented like, gosh, okay. And then we were all called back in for our judgment some weeks after the hearing, and we won again. So it was remarkable. We actually won, and we'd won in the highest court in New South Wales. And so once again, we were feeling really good. And then what actually happened was several weeks later, or a few months later, the New South Wales government changed the rules, actually changed the laws, the state environmental planning policies, and Rio Tinto put in a new application, and here we went again under a whole new set of laws that didn't protect the environment to the same extent that the existing laws that we'd fought. And most importantly, what they did, and this is really strange, under one of the laws in the New South Wales environmental laws, and it's a really bizarre one, it says if in approving a project there has been a public hearing in front of was called the Planning Assessment Commission. So the Planning Assessment Commission would show up to the hall, the community would come, tell the Planning Assessment Commission what it doesn't like about the application, the mining application, in this case the new application. If that public hearing has happened, the community no longer has a right to go to court and argue on the merits of the decision to approve the mine. The only access the community has to the courts is if, in making the decision to approve the mine, there was the decision maker didn't follow the law. So there was a legal error, which is called judicial review. And it's nothing like being able to go to the court with your evidence and your experts and show in an independent arena in front of a court the evidence of why this is not a good...
So pretty much what you'd done the first time couldn't be done again.
Just couldn't do it. And so can you imagine what my community client group, can you imagine what these people, so what they had been through for 5 years and, in the lead up to the assessment, and their whole lives being thrown into turmoil, then getting this empowered fighting spirit, playing by the rules, running one of the most significant court cases that's ever been heard in New South Wales in terms of environmental law, and all of that expert evidence, and we're talking reports a foot high in terms of the contest of evidence, being able to cross-examine their witnesses so that they had to admit that their reports were not as accurate as they ought to be, and then winning again in the Court of Appeal. And then everyone just changes the rules and lets it go ahead. So this community was... basically what has happened is that community has been ruined. Sure. It's been absolutely destroyed. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the people that we worked with have now sold to the mine and gone somewhere else. They've had to leave behind their homes. Hopefully they got paid, they would have got paid market value.
So the coal mine went ahead. Those extensions went ahead in the end. Is this, before you said that you thought law was really cool, is this because, I'm thinking maybe part of the reason why you thought law was really cool is because you were able to achieve justice through actually fighting and putting in the effort to do it, and those avenues were available. Is part of the reason why maybe it's not so cool is because then the government can just change them?
That's why I'm now running for Parliament. Right.
Because what is justice? What is justice if it can be served or it can be achieved, and then this body of power that we call, that's the government, whoever they are, because sometimes it seems it's hard to pinpoint who are making these kinds of decisions, can just change the law like that so quickly.
And look, the way our system works and the way it's meant to work. And I'm a deep believer in our system. I really am. I've been an anti-establishment person. I've sat protesting very early in life, and, I kind of threw it all away for a period of life and went and lived in the hills and, really, really surrendered that belief in that kind of overall system. But I then, at the ripe age of 20 perhaps, came back and realised that after doing lots of research, lots of thinking, realised that actually this is a really fantastic system. The architecture is really, really conducive to a healthy democracy.
And it could be a lot worse as well.
It could be hellishly worse.
Yeah, and it has been in the past.
That's right.
You know, throughout our history, you know.
Absolutely, and you look to other countries and you can see. I mean, when I was going through my anti-establishment period, it was like, oh, come on, bring on the revolution. And then, of course, by 10 o'clock at night after your third cup of tea, it was like, oh, God, and then what? You know, and then what?
Right, what do we replace it with?
Exactly.
Have we got a better solution?
Exactly.
And how would that all,
And what would it look like?
It's also almost a miracle to me that this system even functions day to day. It seems to be this thin fabric, you know, that holds it all together, and everyone agrees to be relatively peaceful and amicable.
Look, I do. I believe deeply that people are. I believe that everybody is inherently good, looking for peace, or is peaceful, and if they haven't got peace or they haven't found it, they're looking for it. They're trying to ascertain and grasp that. And I think people want to be good to each other, and I think people want to look after the environment, and people want to do the right thing. But yeah, the system works so that Parliament makes laws and the courts enforce laws. The executive, so our government and our ministers, they carry on the business of the government business of the day. The thing that is sometimes forgotten, though, in our democracy, and the thing that I believe is one of the most fundamental elements of our democracy, is civil society. It's actually it's us. It's the community, and it's that thing that you say is this strange thin veil that weaves. What that is civil society, and what civil society actually, when you break that down, that is humankind. That is the goodwill of all of these wonderful people who actually make up civil society. All of these fabulous volunteers, these workers, these people, you know, that make it up each day, and are on journeys of learning how to love each other and live with each other. I feel that in terms of our democratic institutions right now, that is the most forgotten aspect of our democracy. We've got parliaments filled with people who, look, I'm sure many of them are well-intentioned and good, but the ones that seem to tread to the top of the pool are the ones that are really the ones that just shouldn't be there right now. They're the ones that are serving a particular interest that is not necessarily the public interest or the community or civil society interest. We know that our two major parties, so both the Liberal National Party and the Labor Party, that in this dual party system that we've had for so long, both of them are funded really, really wrongly and unethically. You know, they are being funded to the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars by mining companies, by gambling sector industries, the racing industry. It's not politics right now, and our parliamentary politics needs a serious washout. It needs a massive gurney and absolutely cleaning out at the moment. So what happens is sure, parliaments can make laws, but they're meant to be making these laws for the good governance of all of us, not just the few that are most connected to those people and lobbying the hardest. I mean, the register of lobbyists at the moment in Parliament is just unfathomable in terms of their interests. And so what we've actually got now is our parliamentarians are mostly being advised in an echo chamber that is absent of the most important part of our community that they're there to serve,
which is civil society.
Civil society, because most ordinary functioning members of civil society are out in their community working for their community. And look, sure, without a doubt, there are parliamentarians who are listening, they know where to look, they know how to find those people, and they know how to have conversations with them, and they're hearing them. But the overwhelming agenda of government and politics of the day at the moment is being informed by a very few, very select, very interested few. One of my motivations for running for Parliament, and when I looked at the spectrum of how would I enter Parliament as an expert lawyer and somebody who feels working in the public interest through law would be a good attribute to a parliament that's role is to make good laws. I mean, I know what good laws look like. I've read them. I've seen them. I know how they apply on the ground. I know how they apply to people in the communities. And I also know what crappy laws look like and ones that really privilege certain voices in the community. So that's why I thought, hey, that's where I want to go. I want to go and take my expertise where I can actually make a difference. So when I looked at the broad spectrum of, well, how do you get there? The Greens was just the obvious party and the obvious avenue for me to put my energy. And it just so happened that in my home seat and the place I love more than anywhere on the planet, just happens to be a marginal seat where the Greens really only just missed out on winning in the last state election by a few votes. So strategically it was an obvious thing for me to do. But also it was the right thing for me to do.
Right. Well, something I'd like to clean out a bit. Look, at the moment, say, around Newcastle, there's the water mining debate. And you see both sides going at it. And on the other side of the water mining debate, let's just say, I don't like to get too much into the rhetoric of left and right too much because it's not helpful. Yeah. Let's just say the people who are against water mining call the people who care about the environment greenies. Yeah. You tend to. I see it a lot. And there seems to be this idea that people who on the left, let's just say, or people who are greens or green, don't care about the economy.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I'd like to clear that up a little bit because something I've been wrestling with recently is like, can you be socially liberal? Can you be, let's say, environmentally progressive and also be like economically conservative at the same time? Because it either seems to be you have to be on one side, you have to care about the economy, but then not care about the environment, or not care about being socially liberal. Or you're on the other side where you're completely socially liberal. Who cares about the economy? Everything's about the environment. Yeah. And so, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure what my question is, but what do you think about the economy? Yeah. You know,
I think that I think that we really need to refocus our understanding of the economy. And this is not me. I haven't I haven't come up with this overnight myself. This is from researching deeply about the economy. What is it? This idea that it's this beast that we have to grow and grow and grow and grow and eat the environment to grow it and exploit every single thing we can to grow this enormous thing.
Would you say that's a neoliberal kind of...
It's categorically a neoliberal way of thinking. Absolutely a neoliberal way of thinking.
Infinite growth on a finite... on finite resources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and you get to my age, through my early 20s, I was caught by that. My whole modus operandi was, oh my God, we've got to work out ways of protecting the environment and continually growing the economy. That's what we've got to do. But we've moved. We have so drastically actually looked at that project. We've let that project run amok now, literally, all the way through the 80s, the 90s and the 2000s. We've let that project absolutely in the hands of the neoliberalists. We've let them have their day. We have privatised everything. We have placed the economy above all of our social services, our service delivery, our technical communications, our hospitals, our jails. We've let that happen, and we've absolutely trusted the neoliberal dream and ideology of infinite growth. And it's failed. It hasn't worked. And now what we have is, and we know it hasn't worked because we're in a bit of trouble. We're kind of in a bit of trouble socially. We're in a bit of trouble in terms of our service delivery. There are people drastically slipping through the safety net. Our hospitals have never been more full with people who are confused, unwell, and are not enjoying a healthy life. There are people that can't access a safe home in volumes that we never ever predicted. And there are people living below the poverty line at inordinate amounts compared to the very, very, very inordinately wealthy few. The disparity is just enormous. And really importantly, the planet is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and it's going to become, and growing food is going to become harder and harder and harder. Our bushfire season is getting longer and more intense. Our drought periods are becoming unlivable, and our more extreme events are amongst us. So we know what we can see, but this idea about the economy is this thing we have to grow, and we have to become a servant to the economy. That theory is leaving the arena so fast, it's incredible. I have been exposed to some of the most fantastic literature, practitioners, experts that are talking about closed-loop economies, and they're happening across Europe, they're happening in smaller communities about actually closing the loop, i.e. there is plenty of money, there is plenty of resource, we need for nothing more than to work with what we have and look after each other. And I say to anybody who's stuck in the false dichotomy, and it is a false dichotomy of environment and economy, that in fact the economy is something that ought to serve us as a community and serve and look after the environment. And it just makes perfect sense. Once you can do that shift and realise that there is enough money, because we don't just make it and then the money just kind of slips through a black hole in the universe and goes somewhere else. It's here. There's plenty of it, and we have enough to look at.
We certainly have the infrastructure in Australia anyway.
We do.
For most people to live good lives.
But they're not doing. They're not accessing that because we're not distributing our wealth properly and fairly.
No.
And so the Greens, like for example, Richard Di Natale was here in Lismore a couple of months ago, and he's very, very big on turning this economic thinking around to actually understand how the economy ought to be managed right now so that we can manage ourselves to a fairer future for everyone. And the one glaring example is last financial year, so up until June 30, 2018, 1 in 3 of our major, enormous corporations operating out in Australia paid zero tax. And you sort of, you look at that, and then we're not just talking about a small amount of the economy, we're talking about 30% of what ought to be in the economy, 30% of the economy that is not coming in the last financial year. So, it's really significant. So if the neoliberal project had worked, in my mind, we would have healthy communities, clean rivers, forested landscapes with native animals happily living in their habitat and communities thriving.
Surely we're smart enough to be able to achieve that.
Of course we are.
And something I find really strange is that the identity of Australia and Australians is to go out camping, go on big drives, enjoy the bush. It's the lucky country because of how we have this lifestyle. That's what our lives are. It's a lifestyle. It's not all about. Wasn't just all about work. You could buy your home and have your family and go camping and go surfing and enjoy the environment that we have here and the big open spaces. I've noticed Australians like to keep space between each other. Say you go to India or China and it's all very closed in and they don't really have this spatial awareness, but we really do. And I say that's because we have so much space, so much environment to enjoy, and yet it would seem, and our economy I would think, is based on a lot of tourism, which is based on the environment, because people come here to enjoy what it's actually like to be in the environment, because you go overseas and there's not that much, say Europe, there's not that many natural wildernesses left, or at least natural wildernesses with space away from people. I know people from overseas come here and they have, for the first time they've ever had, of being alone. Truly alone, and that's what to them Australia is. So it confuses me as to why I see a lot of true blue nationalistic people, which I consider myself a nationalist in the best sense. I love Australia. I grew up here, love it. To me, the identity of Australia is the environment. And so why, I just wonder why that doesn't get, why isn't that considered the economy?
Well, precisely. And I think in some ways we are very lucky because particularly the east coast of Australia and then, of course, the southwest coast of Australia, sorry about that, we have quite a resilient landscape where most of the populations are. We actually still have there's quite a bit of resilience in our landscape. So, even though, say, for example, here in the Northern Rivers, we've been logging our forests for, 200 years or thereabouts, logging them. Some of them still look really beautiful in some ways, I think we've well and truly reached the tipping point, though. We've got some very, very, very sick forests in the northern part of the far north coast here, and we know they're diseased. They've got dieback and they're sick. They're in a really, really, really unhealthy state. The government knows this, the Forestry Corporation knows that, and the communities that are aware know that. So I think some of that resilience that we've had is coming to an end in some ways. For example, going back to the Hunter Valley, where we've really had that massive impact, and just over the last 20 years intensively, and the last 10 even incredibly intensively taking out the coal, we've really impacted the water really, really severely. We knew we were doing, or the ones that were reading the assessments knew it was happening, but it's been very difficult to convey that properly to people. But Hunter Water, for example, the water corporation that manages water, it knows water security for the Hunter is a major catastrophe. And in terms of thinking of the economic value, if we want to talk, in that dichotomy of everything has a monetary value, then you can't simply just fix with money a depleted water system to that one that's depleted to that extent. This is where, it doesn't matter, if I'm a farmer and I've got my bore and I've been taking water, there's only so many more metres you can keep going down because the water's no longer, and that's what's happening. We're finding, I had several clients, I've worked acted for lots of farmers in New South Wales, and there are lots of farmers where their bores have dried up. They go to the mining company. The mining company will help them pay to get a new bore installed.
The water mining company?
This is actually just the coal mining company. Right. They'll make good. They'll never admit that it's their fault, but they'll say, oh, well, we can help you, or we'll have...
Because of the amount of water they're extracting?
Yeah, so of course, because you think about it, you dig these giant open-cut pits, and you're cutting into aquifers, and you're constant... Water, it's interesting because people don't realise how much water is taken out when coal mining takes place. The water extraction volumes are just barely fathomable in terms of the volumes over...
In a similar way, if you dig a hole, you start to hit water and water starts to seep into the hole. Is it similar to that? And then they have to pump it out?
Yep, they have to pump it out. And we're talking pretty big holes. Yeah. We're talking, moonscapes. Yeah. Wow. So, and then we go back to water mining. Why are we doing that in the Tweed? Why are we taking water? I mean, look, the thing with water mining in the Tweed is, the groundwater system is a very complex system. It's not a really, really straightforward system. Like, we've done a lot of work in areas, there's more simple groundwater systems, for example. I mean, look, I'm not a scientist. I'm only talking in terms of the evidence I've seen as a lawyer, environmental lawyer. But some groundwater systems are much more simple. And you can see this reflected in the law through what we call our water sharing plans. You have groundwater sharing plans, surface water sharing plans, and we've got these quite complex
what are groundwater sharing plans?
So that's the law. So basically...
this is something I'd like to touch on a little bit, the law in terms of groundwater. And
it's complex. It's water law is one of the more complex areas of law.
Who owns the water?
Well, that's interesting because legally the state administers the ownership of the water.
Is that the Crown?
Yeah, the Crown. Ultimately, the Crown owns water, but you have a legal right to it depending on whether you pay for that, whether you've got it. So basically all...
Does that come under common law or something?
No. It's now all covered by legislation. So the legislation's overridden the common law, and what happens is all water, whether it falls out of the sky or comes out of the ground, is managed somehow. It's factored in to the legal system of water and the legal management of water. So if you have, if you own, so groundwater, under the Water Management Act in New South Wales, each water area, and these are designated sort of catchment-based or groundwater system-based, each water area has a management plan, a water sharing plan. And they're basically like management plans. And what that means is there's a number of rules in those sharing plans. So what it does is it looks at the water in that area. So in the Tweed, for example, there's the Tweed Groundwater Sharing Plan. I've forgotten the exact name of it. And it will say... it describes the underground water system, and what it will do is say that there are certain rules around who can take what and when they can take it. So, for example, if you had a licence, so say you bought a block of land, and attached to that land historically, and you get it, is a licence to extract so many megalitres of water each year from a bore for the purpose of, and it would often have a purpose attached to it. So it might have been, say in a water mining case, to bottle and sell, or it may be you can extract that water for irrigation, for cropping, growing crops. You can have that licence, and it's going to service you because you've got a nursery and you're allowed that access, and you've got permission from the Department of Water to... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then what happens under water sharing plans, the minister can set certain rules. This happens a lot more for rivers. Probably not equally so, but for example, you can have a water sharing plan for surface water as well. Right. So there'll be a water sharing plan for the Tweed River, the surface water, etc. And so what will happen is you might have a Class A licence, which means you can take however many megalitres of water out of the river every year, no problem. But what happens is entitlements are in a bit of a hierarchy, and you pay for them. So the more you pay, obviously the higher your right to take water is. But what also happens, it's a very complicated system, because under some licences, if you don't take your take, you'll surrender it. You will end up losing that entitlement, because what we've learned is in most of our water sharing plans and systems, what we've learned is too much water is coming out. There are too many licences, and too much water is coming out of the system. So what we've tried to do over time, because it's historic in the sense that water licences were just given, almost like cornflakes back in the 50s and 40s, and you used to get water entitlements, and if you wanted it, they wrote you one out and you got it. Nobody was looking at how much water there was in the system. It was only in the early 2000s we started to realise actually there's only so much water in a system, it doesn't just keep coming, it generates, there's so much water and so much water storage natural storage in a system. So we started to get a bit more scientific about the way we manage and regulate water use. So for example, if I wanted to grow blueberries here in Lismore and I wanted to take water out of the Wilsons River, it may be, I don't know if this is exact, this is just hypothetical, it may be that the Office of Water says to me, actually there is no available water for you to take. The only way you can take water is by buying it off somebody else now. And this is where water becomes an incredible trading commodity. So if you look at what's happening out in the Murray-Darling, water is so over allocated out there, it's not funny. There is just, because people have just got mega litre licences to just take. Some days the rivers run backwards there on the Barwon Darling rivers because there's just not enough water, and it's all going inland to grow cotton. It's incredible. But what can happen is, so say I get my licence to grow my blueberries, say somebody downstream, surrendered a licence, I bought it, and this happens all the time. People are buying and selling water licences all the time. I buy that licence, great, I can water my blueberries and happily grow blueberries on my farm. Then say we go into chronic drought, really severe drought, the river stops flowing and we're at a period of low flow. Then what happens? The minister can set rules. And that is how we now regulate water take. So the minister can issue a set of rules for a period of time and say, right, there's low flows, so Class A licences can only take a percentage of their take. Class B licences, you're on hold, you can't take anything. Class C licences, you can't take anything. So, of course, all this hierarchy. So for towns, domestic use, obviously they're really high in the order of priorities. They get to keep using water, but local governments may decide to regulate it. So you can see how there's this whole... I'm probably not really doing justice to the whole system because it is complex. I'm just trying to snapshot some examples of the regulatory system around water to give you a flavour of... There are access licences and you can take. There are plans within which there are plans. Within those, there are licences to take, whether that's groundwater or surface water. There's general rules, like say you own land and you have a dam. You're only allowed to build a dam a certain capacity based on your land catchment, because if you dig your dam too big, you're stopping the watershed from going into the rivers or the system. So even that, there's a farm dam calculator depending on your rainfall area, so how high the rainfall is in your area, the size of your land will determine the size of the dam you're allowed without having to then go and get development approval to build a bigger one. So that's your just general allowance of what you're allowed to do. That's called your harvestable right. And so there's these common law rights that have stayed in the law, been written into the black letter legislative regime. There's a water sharing plan for each area, both surface and groundwater. People are licensed to take within that, and then depending on the amount of water, so the climatic factors that are influencing water, the minister can set rules around regulating your particular take at a given time. That's kind of the system of... as I say, I haven't done it proper justice. It takes people years to sit down and...
It's fine. No, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, but I'm keeping up with you.
So with water mining, at the moment, my understanding is some of these water miners in the Tweed have certain licences to take water. It's not 100% clear, is my understanding, that those licences were granted to be able to take the water, put it in bottles and sell it. My understanding is there's a broader sort of, yes, they can use that water because they can take it, and then what they do with it is up to them. And so one of the dilemmas in the Tweed and with Tweed Shire Council is that they can't control the water take. That's the state government's department. And then what all council can do is regulate the activities around the taking of the water, such as the trucks and the infrastructure that is involved.
Which me and Jeremy talked about, it doesn't really seem like they have the funding or the resources to track that or to police it.
Not at all. And because if you think...
Is that the council's fault?
No.
So I see people going, council this, council that, but, maybe is the problem higher or deeper than... Because surely, I don't know.
It's such a conundrum because, people, and I'm seeing it every day, why bother putting development conditions on development if you can't enforce them? Right. And that's right. We get that. But you do have to put conditions on development, obviously. Enforcing development is difficult for public authorities. We have a very high threshold, so it's a criminal standard that you have to prosecute for breaching a development consent, and that takes a heck of a lot of resources. So if people are saying at the moment, the Tweed water miner is doing 4 truck movements a day more than they're allowed, say they're allowed 10 truck movements a day and they're doing 14, council has to look at that and say, how significant is that breach in the order of the entire council, local government area, complaints about breaches of development consent. So this is where councils end up having to be strategic about what compliance action they follow and which ones they're going to issue penalties for. And if they're going to issue penalties, they have to be prepared to fight those in court, because if you issue a penalty notice to an operator and the operator says, oh, no, that's not what I did, I'm going to go to court and challenge this, you've got to be ready to go to court. And again, councils...
and so how is council going to fund going to court? Is that with public money?
Of course.
That they're, first and foremost, needing to distribute into just the very bare minimum services. So they'll be taking money out of their pool, which I'm sure is probably in short supply. I'm just assuming. It doesn't seem like councils are having much fun at the moment, or at least the Tweed Council anyway. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's a fact. It just seems that from my perspective. So in order to defend it in court, they're going to have to take funding from elsewhere and then to put it into these legal proceedings.
That's exactly
just to fight one particular infringement in one particular place.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So you can see it's really difficult. I mean, and local government, I think you're absolutely right. There's no way local government has enough money to be doing the work that it's expected to do. Councils provide an incredible amount of services, and they're also responsible for implementing their local environmental plans and dealing with the day-to-day development applications and complying development and their services. I think there is... their councils obviously get money through rates, and they also get money through the state government, because ultimately they're an instrumentality or an agency of the state government. But it's not enough money to do what's expected to be done. Some councils, Byron Shire Council in the 90s, had a legal defence fund. And it was one of the sort of, and obviously some of the metropolitan Sydney councils have legal fighting funds too. But some councils, some councils don't even have, legal advisors within council, or, some councils only have 2 compliance officers for the whole shire, So, I think they're terribly under-resourced to be able to do the sort of work they're doing. And what happens is, when communities wake up to a particular issue, and in, say, the Tweed water mining, where members of the community, this is the first environmental issue they've had to deal with, or the first affront, they find all this really shocking, oh gosh, but why, but it's because it's resource constrained, it's difficult, and it's an unpopular thing to do, to be running out there chasing, but it's expected to do it. And so, every council at some point is going to have to work out what is most important to its constituents in the local environment. That's the other thing. Councils will ordinarily have a sort of a prosecution guideline of some sort with a sort of risk matrix. So what will happen is the risk to the environment or the risk to the community so significant that they really should take action, or is the risk in the lower to medium order? And if they don't take action, or they write letters just saying to the operator, hey, we understand you're doing the wrong thing, could you please do the right thing? And trying that more gentle approach to try and get compliance. But it's complex. And, when you have an issue as controversial as water mining, because there's hundreds and hundreds of people that are really worried about water mining in the Tweed. And rightly so. When you look at it across the spectrum, what is, where's the public benefit in water mining? You've got a business on a piece of land that is using a water entitlement, and water is an interest of a resource of public interest. And we're putting it in plastic bottles and shipping it off for a profit.
It's a resource of international interest as well, considering so many places around the world don't have access to quality water. I know China and India, for decades have been fighting over water sources as well, because it's becoming very short supply because of the population. I think just generally how we're managing it as well.
I don't think... I am certain it's not the sort of development that has a future in the Northern Rivers. You know, I mean, we know under our all the climate modelling and all the science is, and it's pretty good. Like it's not really guesswork. It's really good scientific modelling with quite very conservative inputs, in fact. And what it's showing for us here in the Northern Rivers, so this is pretty much the New South Wales government's own modelling as well. It's showing us that the Northern Rivers is a resilient landscape, that under a climate change future, or however we want to say it, we will fare better than many other places in Australia. We will continue to have good rainfall at certain periods of the year. But what we know, without a doubt, is our rivers and our creeks will have lower flows in terms of the general pattern of our waterways. I just don't think that's controversial at all or contested. That's the sort of consensus view. And of course, with temperatures rising, we're going to experience, more hotter than average days throughout our summer period. So at the moment, by 2020, which is now pretty much, it's 2019 now, we're going to, at a minimum experience 10 more days over 40 degrees throughout summer as an absolute minimum. And nobody's contesting that. So that's when you start to see things like the crops that we've relied on for years for summer growth. They may not be able, we may have to come to new ways of understanding how to grow crops. We will get more crop failures and things like that. This is where water resources, and sure, temperature is one aspect, but this is where water resources become the sort of most important factor to the resilience of what we can do going into the future in terms of our food security, and everything that relies on that. So we're really not, I think it's just awfully simplistic and short-sighted, to think of water mining in the Tweed now as just an isolated development that, it's just 30 Olympic swimming pools a year is one of them. That's all it is. Yeah. And he or she and that company's putting it in bottles and shipping it out. That's all okay. It's not that much. It's kind of it's very short-sighted to think of it in that context. No longer should we be looking at water at all in that constrained development by development. We need to be looking at that resource collectively. We need to, and if we want to use economic terms because they're useful, we've got to look at what is our budget allocation in terms of water. How much have we got in the bank? How much on loan have we got out there, and how much is just kind of going out the door for a good time, or for someone else's financial benefit.
It seems like there needs to be work put in to really get an understanding of how much is in the bank. Yeah. In the Tweed Shire. It doesn't seem like enough testing or real research has been done. I know they do some 24-hour tests and
yes.
stuff.
Yes, and monitoring stuff and regulating. And look, we do. We've got, there is some good information out there. There's some really good information. But my understanding is the Tweed groundwater system is complex, and it's not like we're sitting on a Great Artesian Basin or anything like that here. It's limited. We don't have massive volumes of groundwater beneath us. Our water is our resilience is because it rains, and we need to remember that. And that's how our groundwater fills up from our rain cycle, and we need to really, really keep it in there to allow that cycle to continue.
And rainforests, as far as I know as well, attract rain to them.
There is more and more tangible evidence to show how trees do contribute significantly to rainfall, whether that's rainforest or other forms of tree vegetation. That's becoming more and more clear. The stuff I've been reading for years would suggest that, but it's becoming more and more accepted that you denude a landscape of all vegetation, it's likely to become drier and drier and drier. We know that, and rain less and less and less. I think we really should be celebrating the fact that we know so much and that we've learnt so much, and be willing to embrace this knowledge and act upon it. And this is what I am finding incredibly frustrating with our decision makers and our political systems and our legal systems, is that we're not celebrating the embracing of the knowledge and information and the capacity we now have to exchange information at rapid speeds and act on that information. It's like we're stuck in acting on things we've done, the things we believe in and our ideology, rather than the very things that are in front of us and the knowledge we have around them. And I think, the sooner that we are able to move the kind of the bulk of our decision-making framework to a much more informed, evidence-based, with sort of public interest safety criteria in that decision-making, the sooner we're actually going to experience much more fulfillment, much more health, much more connectedness, and much more rewardedness in amongst our communities. And don't get me wrong, I feel like in the Northern Rivers, we have an incredible fabric in amongst our community for becoming connected and staying connected. And as you said at the very beginning, we've done, so much of us have done that through our fights to protect the environment. This is an area that is renowned for some of the remarkable cultural environmental fights we've had to protect what are now, and let's never forget, what are now world-class World Heritage forests. You look at our Gondwana nightcap border ranges, Terania Creek. I mean, these are some of the most spectacular and valuable forests on this planet.
And all thanks to a bunch of dirty feral hippies tying their kids to trees to save that environment.
That's right, yeah.
I'll ask a couple more questions with the intention of wrapping this up.
Yes, of course.
You were just talking about the seasoned veterans of environmental protection in this area. Something that I find a little bit concerning myself is, and I see it in myself as well, is there's a real lack of interest in politics and the environment and in activism in younger generations. So I see a lot of people who are interested in the environment and being active in this area. You see a lot of older people, older than me, but I don't often see people my age. I know people my age, but it's not so much of a regular thing. I was wondering if you had any comment or maybe advice to maybe ways in which younger people, because I know there will be younger people who are listening to this right now and they do care, but do you have any advice into how they could get involved in environmental activism, but also in politics as well? Because it seems boring sometimes too.
Politics can be so boring.
Especially Australian politics. I mean, I think American politics is still in the limelight at the moment because it's almost like a TV show.
For not the right reasons, but anyway. Yeah. No, look, it's true. Politics, I mean, let's start with activism. Activism really is, I think, I just think everybody ought to do a period in life that is involving being an activist. And the reason I say that is because it's probably a bit personal, because I know that the period in my life where I was an activist was the period where I really learnt the most about the most amount of things, if that makes sense. So I learnt an incredible amount of how to live with other people, how to work closely with other people, how to be strategic with other people, how to fight political fights with people. And it was that thing, because you're standing up for something that really matters at the time. You found something that you're passionate about. And that's the thing. You can't just be an activist because you want to be. You've just got to let the activist come out of you at the time that it offers itself to come out, so to speak. And it normally is. It normally is. In fact, I think it probably always is in response to some injustice, whether that's an injustice you feel or you see or you hear. It's your response, and ultimately that's where that's where the activism comes from. For example, I was an activist at a very young age. I was sort of in my late teens when I was a full-time activist, and I was working on a particular campaign, and my activism was sparked by a knowledge of, and then a visual of, and a full understanding of the ramifications of giant old growth forests being bulldozed for floors, so that people would saw them up and make floorboards out of them, and understanding the importance. And what actually got me, where I know that it was the trigger for me, was when I learnt what those trees actually meant in the context of the ecosystem, and they happen to be the homes of these incredible ancient owls and these flying yellow belly gliders and sugar gliders and these magnificent birds and these ground dwelling little marsupial mice which have evolved over millions of years and hopped over from islands from Papua New Guinea. And so for me the old growth forest experience was, yes, they were trees, but it was the story of what all of, and it was the fresh flowing creeks coming from them.
It makes a difference if you experience it yourself as well, if you actually know what it is that's in danger with your own eyes.
That's exactly right.
Sometimes I think on social media and stuff, they say, oh, this thing's being destroyed, that's being destroyed. But I think for a lot of people, it's conceptual. It's like, right. I haven't actually been there. And that's when you grow a connection to country or a connection to that place.
Yes. Because
you have memories of it and you experience something
absolutely.
there.
You are absolutely contextual. You're in the context of it all and you know what it means. That's forest, that was forest for me. For some people, and particularly in this region, their first ever bit of activism was around the Bentley, the coal seam gas threat. Now, that was interesting because people developed that activism more through the building of a social movement together. That was not an individual experience, like, say, mine was in the forest. This was a collective the building of a social movement. So you did hear from somebody else what the problem of coal seam gas was, and you did hear that it's threatening our water. How? And people would explain it, and you'd see it in pictures, and you would see it on social media. So the Bentley and the coal seam gas, this idea of invasive gas fields taking over our farmlands and polluting our waters, that was an incredible story, and the social movement around that built. But then you look at someone like Hillary Clinton, who now calls herself an activist. When Hillary Clinton sits and talks to people and says, well, what do you consider yourself now? She was the the first lady when she was with her husband. Bill. Oh, she's still with Bill when Bill was president or whatever you are over there, and then she was the runner-up herself. She was the candidate. She was the first person in line. She was all these Secretary of State. She's been everything. She sits down now and people say, what are you? And she goes, I'm an activist. And so for her, becoming an activist is this thing she's done at the end of her life after living in the system and playing everything she can. Coming second to Trump, that's incredible. And then watching what he has done, she's now an activist, and that means talking about and taking action where she can to try and debase this Trump power, So, yeah, activism is a really interesting thing. But what I would say about it is it really is a cultural thing. It is you always become part of a sort of an affinity of people because you're working on something very, very deep and passionate together. And most activism does have a sense of urgency around it, because that's why you go from just engaging in an empowered way for looking for change to becoming an activist, because you've got to get active now because there's a sense of urgency around the thing that you need to protect or work towards, or the awareness you need.
Do you think some people might actually find meaning from doing that? A sense of meaning that they've been searching for?
Absolutely.
Sense of responsibility?
Yep. Absolutely, because you've put your...
A sense of community.
Totally, and you've put skin in the game, you know, for something that, whether it be a social justice or an environmental justice, or it may be an economic justice, a justice. It's normally, activism arises in the face of injustice.
When we were at the UKI Hall the other week, and you were talking, some guy put up, his name's Abi, put up his hand and he said, well, why should we go to the council chambers and be there? Because they're not even going to listen to us anyway. And you said, no, you should go because they know you're there and you are counted, and it makes that much of a difference. And I went there on that day, and there was hundreds of people there, maybe a couple hundred, you know, but it was a lot of people. And I'd never really done that before myself. And I felt this huge sense of community, accomplishment, really deep sensation that I know that I've missed at times, and I know a lot of other people are missing it a lot of really being there with people on an issue that we really cared about. And we definitely were counted. There was no doubt. It was unmistaken that people were there and their voices were without a doubt being heard. And so I really felt, I felt like I was activated in a sense of, oh, wow, I really want to get involved with politics now. I really want to find issues to work on in my local community. I'm on the Gold Coast at the moment, so I'm looking for issues there. But I just really want to get the message out to young people, my age in particular. Like, you can really get a sense of deep meaning from getting involved in local politics and local endeavours of activism that you thought maybe was you'd gain from becoming famous or becoming a social media star. But I really think it goes back to our tribal roots of being a part of a community and having an identity of being a part of that community that we've lost, but I think can be revived through local politics. Because I'd really like to see, myself included, but I really want to see our generation come through and start to get involved with politics a lot more. Because say once your generation are gone, which is inevitable, it's going to happen, then we're here. And like you were talking about that civil society, that social fabric. And I think when we talk about being an activist and activating, you're activating as a part of that civil society rather than being complacent or being inactive and having the government or the law or society work on you. You're actually becoming, even if you're just like that one small little segment, there's great belonging and meaning in that system. You are that system. You're a part of that system.
That's right. And I think that is, you've summed it up the way, that's the very essence. You know, if young people keep seeing, or if young people see themselves separate to this awful, boring system, the reason it's like that is because we've let it be. We're responsible for it. It's happened on our watch. That said, I believe that we trusted people, and we didn't think it would go kind of so off in a way. But like, why aren't there young people in politics? Why? At the moment, though, I must say, so the Greens actually have a senator from Western Australia, Daniel, and I think he's maybe 20. Oh gosh, maybe in his mid to late 20s.
That's pretty good.
And he happens to be the only member of Parliament in a wheelchair. And I have to say, his contribution to the Australian Parliament right now is fantastic. Like, it is phenomenal what he's doing, and I would do anything to have 10 more of those people in our parliament than the sort of, 10 that are all the same. And I don't mean this in any disrespect to the gender, particularly of men, but it is no coincidence that our parliament is mostly full of white, privileged, middle-class men. That's not an accident. That's something we need to change. And
I think that doesn't necessarily solely pertain to a race, but a frame of mind or a perspective.
That's what I'm saying. It's not. That's what I mean by it's not meant to be a gendered thing. It just actually is. This one type of mind just keeps privileging itself to keep going in there. And at the same time, there's a whole culture of dependency on that. We believe they're the people who should be in there, and we've believed and we've empowered them to be there. And that's why I say, come on, young people, like, let's do it, because we're all missing out if young people aren't active. I've been, since I decided to run for the Greens here in Lismore, I must say that I have been so inspired. There is currently a group of fantastic young people mobilising around this campaign, and nothing has inspired me more. It's wonderful, the contribution that these young people, and when I say young, I'm mostly talking sort of from about 17 to, say, 29. I'm talking that age group, maybe 32, but to 29. That age group of people, the contribution that these young people are bringing to this campaign is second to nothing. Like their skills and their organisation capacity and their networking is just, it's...
You mean them bloody millennials?
Seriously, I think if you want to win a seat right now, you need some millennials on your team. And they're, the other thing is, though, what I'm watching is that lots of those, probably the majority of those young people have at some point expressed that they did feel a sense of despairing. Yeah. And they've now moved from that despair to empowerment, and they're engaged, whether it's on a daily basis for some of them, or on a weekly basis, or twice a weekly, whether it's been through phone banking and talking to people, whether it's been through knocking on doors, whether it's through social media, whether it's through organising events, turning up, whether it's wearing a T-shirt, whether it's doing some artwork, but the one thing I know they feel, and I see it because we've currently got this hub in Lismore, they come together and they are together, and you really see it. And that's that stuff you were talking about, and I always see it as, it's like an affinity group. It is your tribe, and you're making change together, and you're working on something hopeful together. The politics of hope is, I think, something beautiful. And I think we've got to stop thinking of politics only as these men in suits that go to that house. That's just a hub. That's just a venue. Politics, I think the definition of politics is the art of living. It's about living.
Right. I think Gandhi or someone said, someone saying they're not interested in politics is like a drowning man saying he's not interested in water.
Yeah.
It's the fabric. It's everywhere. We are politics. We're living, political beings. So bare bones basic. There's someone listening right now who's a young person. I'm just going to focus on young people because I am one. Who's like, I want to get involved. Let's just say they're in an urban environment. I feel like Lismore's a little bit easier to get involved a bit because like you guys got this green centre right in the middle of town.
We have now. We've just created it. We're very lucky.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's just say someone on the Gold Coast, for instance. What is the... Because I know a lot of young people who care, but they're also a bit disenfranchised by the government, society, and they don't want to get involved because they feel like they don't want to feed the system that And I really liked what you were saying about how it's a brilliant system and how you were against it, but then you kind of came to love it or see the necessity of it. And I feel like instead of dismantling, we need to be building. Or dismantle a little bit to then construct something better in its place, rather than just like get rid of the whole thing entirely and be potentially left with the dark ages again. What is something like really just like easy that someone could do right now if they wanted to get into politics, or even if they want to run for politics? Like, what does that take to do?
Well,
are there certain centres to contact?
Absolutely. So look, in the overwhelming majority of areas, there will be a Greens party that operates, a local group, and they will meet. Meetings can be a bit boring, but the offshoots of meetings are often exciting, things that are happening, events, get-togethers. If it's not the Greens, then sort of, I'm just trying to think, if it's not... in my mind, the Greens is where it's at for young people. There's a young Greens as well as the Greens that's part of the Greens, and you join and you get together and there's networks, and you have closed Facebook groups and chat sites where you can connect, and you can grieve and you can air your grievances, or you can celebrate on those. So there are those networks that exist. If it's not party-centric politics, then there are always environmental groups around, whether they be single-issue groups or and it depends.
So it could be like an environmental centre or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was about to say, it depends what your environmentalism at the time is. Like, you might be somebody that just wants to go and look after sick and injured wildlife, so you might want to join a wildlife group. And through even those groups, whether it be Wires or the Currumbin Sanctuary or wherever, even through those groups, networks form and they're active. Right. They're doing things.
That's the key. They're active.
They're active. It's always about finding active. And then what I say is, if you can't find anything, create something. Make something happen. And even if that is putting a film night on in your own lounge room, and it's a really positive film like the one that's just been put out tomorrow, you know, by these fantastic French filmmakers, or the film we saw at UKI, which was a really moving film.
Yeah, it was like an Indigenous elder from near Uluru talking about the history of his people and what happened through colonisation and colonialism and being separated from his land and his country and his family, and
learning
just
together.
To describe it to people.
Exactly, learning together is also being active. So, you know, by having those events and having them activist focused or environmental focused,
right?
That's
so it could be by putting, as you're saying, putting on a movie, and by people actually going and watching that movie, they then become aware of that person's story or that issue.
Absolutely. And talking together after it. What does it matter to you, and what have you done, and where? And then it's, how do you put on that evening, or how does that? Well, you can start by, you know, advertising it in your local paper. There's often a little free rag or whatever, or putting signs up around your locality. And because remembering, social movements always start and move, you know, locality by locality or street by street, or however you say it, you know, or through, social media platform network by the other one. Although there's a wonderful woman who is a fabulous local here, who was very, very much behind the building of the social movement that became Bentley, the Coal Seam Northern Rivers Gasfield Free. And at the moment, we've been on a few panels recently together talking about being active, and particularly around trying to transition out of fossil fuels and renewables and the seriousness of that, and how we've only got a short period of time. And her key take-home message at the moment is, less Facebook, more face. Less Facebook, more face. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. I think it's... I've been thinking about it lots, because I just know young people actually really engage well with Facebook.
I think it's played an important part of spreading awareness on these issues as well. But it also doesn't go very far too, because you can share something and be like, rah, yes, I don't agree with this, but then what? Then what? So exactly.
So I'm transforming it from fine for Facebook, more face, you know. Yeah. Facebook's fine, but more face, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll end this with one last question.
Yes.
How do you remain optimistic? Because I think when you start to care about environmental issues, or even when you start to realise how corrupt the government is, how corrupt the system can be, how unfair it really can be. Oh man, I think I was depressed for a couple of years. When it dawned upon me, I really started to learn about that stuff when I was about 19. Luckily, I found the optimism again, which I think is so important. And you said hope is important too. How do you, as someone who's, you know, a lot of the information about climate change and all these environmental issues and what's really going on, how do you remain optimistic at the same time? Because you have to have optimism to build, right?
Yes.
If you're pessimistic, where's the inspiration to build anything at all?
Absolutely. I don't really think optimism is necessarily a choice. I just think that there's always a reason to be optimistic. Always. You know, we have so much beauty and wellness and around us, like in the context of our environment here. We are so blessed and so fortunate all across Australia. We really are. There are wonderful people everywhere that I haven't yet met, and I just can't wait to meet them. And I'm trying, so you just you have to get excited every day for the new people you are going to meet if you're open to meeting them. And right now, I just don't actually think there is any time whatsoever to be anything but optimistic. We've got a massive job ahead of us, and we can do it. I know that it's a little bit like what I was saying before. We need to celebrate how fortunate we are that we are so clever and we do know so much and we have so much great information around us to be able to make good decisions and to be able to make this place wonderful for everyone. But we need to get on with that work. So I'm a grandmother now, so it's kind of, people tell me I'm a younger grandmother, but, I just look at those, and I'm not suggesting everybody needs to have children to understand this, but I just, I see the young people and particularly infants, and I just look at how they see the world. You can see it and the magnificence they see, and just that capacity to just want things to be great, and while things are great, and we're part of a massive earth system, and we're part of it, and it's a beautiful system, and it's a remarkable system, and it's full of wonder and glory, I think we've probably just spent a bit too much time thinking about things that are not necessarily the things to be thinking the most about, like the economy and like how we grow and grow and grow. Standard of living is so important, and the wellness of living is fundamental. And so what I am most inspired about and most optimistic about is helping people so that all of us together can find a way where we can all be part of the goodness of this planet and life together. We can do it, but I do also think that you have to have good friends, you have to look after each other, and you have to watch out for each other. And this does go back to that affinity and having good grassroots connections with your community. So you do have to reach out, and then you stay optimistic together, because that's the other thing, I suppose, that ultimately, when you look at what is the human pursuit here, we're all trying to achieve great things, but we're also all just looking for love and to be loved, or whatever that word means to people, whether that's appreciated, accepted, etc.
I think we could agree on that.
Yeah, and that's the human side of us all, and the sort of the self-growth side of ourselves. And that's a beautiful thing, it's an absolutely beautiful thing. The same as this planet is a beautiful thing, but we need to know how to take care of it, take care of each other, and take care of ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for talking.
Thanks.
Is there any last, do you want to promote anything that you're doing or where people can find you?
Sure. Look,
I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, of course. Look, I'm the Greens candidate standing for the state seat of Lismore. I've got 12,500 square kilometres of an electorate. I think it's the most beautiful place in the world, and some of the most fabulous people on the planet live here. And I want to do things differently, and I'm running for Parliament because I believe that I'm ready for it, in that sense of my whole life's building of knowledge has come to this place. It's my expertise, and I'm overwhelmed with passion and an abundance of vision and ideas, and I want to I want to bring that to life in the context of young people, old people, and all of us together, and of course the voiceless, all those things that can't speak and have no voice of their own. I want to be their voice as well. So I'm hoping to win a seat in Parliament and do my best if I get in to try to influence things in the public interest to make it a better place.
Wallop woo, party people. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please like, share and subscribe. Hardcore Papyrus, anything that you want on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and of course at www.hardcorepapyrus.com, where you can find all the latest things that you would love to enjoy. Yeah, look, I just want to say I interviewed Sue as an individual. I think she's a brilliant person. I'm not necessarily endorsing the Greens Party, although I think Sue is a great candidate for them. And I think we do have some concerning environmental issues that are looming over our future, and we've got to look after each other and our environment.